To this day, at 87 years of age, I don't know who I am. I've no identity. I don't know who my mother is. When I left Hyde Park, I sat in Griffith Avenue on a seat and I found myself in a terrible state. I had intended, and I'm going to say this, and I say it in front of my husband, I intended to kill myself. I didn't know where I was, nothing about it. I didn't know anything.
The common thread with all these horrible stories is a dark past in Ireland of secrets and lies within families, within the church and the state, and really a door that needs to be opened so wide to let the sunlight in.
This is Fintan Dunne for Irish First Mothers. Thanks for joining me. And I'd like to take you through the background to what you just heard there from Mary Merritt, one of the Magdalen women who is in Ireland in early June to attend government celebrations over the resolution of these issues for the Magdalen women. Now, we'll be taking a look at Charles Flanagan and his interview on Prime Time and using that to look beneath the propaganda and see what's really going on. And some of it's going to surprise you. We'll also be looking at the implications of this for the Mother and Baby Home Commission and how the government will respond to that. But let's just pick up a bit of this interview with Charles Flanagan on Prime Time.
I'm joined now by the Minister for Justice, Charlie Flanagan. Minister, you were in the Mansion House this evening. You apologised to the women. Earlier, the President apologised to them at the Áras 5 years ago, as we saw in Rita's report. The then Taoiseach made a very emotional apology to them as well. And yet the state is still denying legal liability for what happened to them.
Well, that's a technical term.
Well, that's a technical term. Legal liability, says the Minister for Justice, Charles Flanagan, is a technical term. It certainly is if a judge finds you guilty. It's a technical term, isn't it? So it's a technical term, however, which the government doesn't feel bound by. You might be surprised to hear that even though Enda Kenny stood up in Dáil Éireann and admitted and apologised for the failings of the state, that did not amount to an admission of legal liability. No. Behind that technical term defence, which Charlie Flanagan, the Minister for Justice, has just rolled out, is this logic that when Enda Kenny apologises or some Taoiseach apologises on behalf of the state in Ireland, they're only apologising for a moral failure of the state, not a legal failure of the state. Now, isn't that a very interesting finessing of words? Moral failure versus legal failure. And they're denying legal liability to this very day for anything that happened in a Magdalen laundry. So there's a shocker for you. They've never admitted liability, and they never will. And when they apologise in Dáil Éireann for what happened in mother and baby homes, that won't be an admission of liability either. It'll be just an admission of a moral liability. Snakes can't tell lies as effectively as these people. Here we go. We'll take some more of this.
I think it's fair to say that the state has, over the past number of years, made available a form of redress. So far, just less than 700 women have availed of that to the tune of €26 million. But it's not about money here.
But it's not about money here. We're not going to talk about something as base as money. And we've handed out a lot of money. I mean, 27 million, 26 million, 700 women. Yeah, €40,000 per person on average that would amount to for the appalling treatment over decades in some cases, which we saw in the Magdalen laundries for which they received no pay. But hey, as Mr. Flanagan says, this is not about money. Let's not make this about money, especially when it's government money and when it's you who are being screwed.
I was very touched today to have the opportunity of seeing firsthand those involved, listening to their story. The events of today and tomorrow are part of the Judge Quirk recommendations when he said that there should be an event like this. Let
me just pause it there. There should be an event like this. I'm sure there should. But an event like this should not be a substitute for justice. A night out is not the same as justice. A free night out on the state is very nice PR for the state. But it's a good investment because it allows you to pretend that you care, when, as you will see when you decode this interview, they don't care at all.
I was very pleased as Minister for Justice to get some stories, to see what more the state can do in order to ensure that we have really what is a period of atonement on the part of the state for what went on.
Okay, but if the state doesn't admit liability, if it doesn't admit responsibility, if the redress scheme is ex gratia payments, not payments by right, isn't that denying the women something that they are crying out for, which is not just an apology, but taking responsibility?
Well, I think an apology, a form of compensation, a form of help and assistance for people.
Now you heard that. An apology, a form of compensation, a form of help and assistance for people. These are the kind of terminologies which are being rolled out in relation to the upcoming Mother and Baby Homes Commission of Investigation report. Supports, structures. What they amount to is a free medical card if you don't already have one for services which don't exist. And, I don't know, maybe the equivalent of a fuel allowance extra in your state benefit. Per week or something derisory, something which gives you no real justice or recompense.
Who are still very much in positions of vulnerability. Over half of those who attended in the Mansion House actually came from the UK. Yeah. And many of those hadn't been in Ireland for many years. This is a deep and serious scar on these women.
You know, this is platitudes, as Cathy McMahon called them. Once the founder of Irish First Mothers, platitudes, and they are really good at rolling out these terminologies about how appalling and terrible and etc. And it means absolutely nothing. But that's what you're getting here now. But when we try and nail this guy down, watch what happens.
And I believe it's important that the state does engage in the type of arrangement that we're now doing.
And I think you've got a lot of praise from the organisations for that and for organising the event today and tomorrow. But, I mean, you said this evening, this state allowed you to be incarcerated and made to work in Magdalen laundries. We had a duty of care, we had a job of inspection, and we failed. Indeed, we even took on the role, in some cases, of referring agents. So my question really is, given that, how can the state not be legally liable?
Well, it's because the state failed that the state is anxious to atone for
but
a
not
wrongdoing.
admit liability.
For a wrongdoing. Well, admitting liability in the circumstances is merely a technical term. I'm very anxious to ensure, for example, that the ancillary benefits that were promised, on the face of it, a simple exercise such as the provision of a medical card.
Which was recommended 5 years ago and still hasn't worked.
Yeah, and I very much regret that that's still a source of concern. I'll deal with it. But
when will you deal with it, Minister?
Well, I'll deal with it at the earliest opportunity.
I'll deal with it at the earliest opportunity. Now, if I could just decode that parliamentary speak for you, that means get lost. I'll deal with it whenever I feel like it. I'll deal with it whenever I'm bothered to. I might deal with it eventually if I'm in a good humour, but otherwise I'm just going to waffle here now and tell you that I'll deal with it at the earliest opportunity.
But we also have to deal with it in the context of other jurisdictions. But I believe that the very least the state can do is ensure that people now in this position of vulnerability, that they are helped through, for example, welfare and health, other benefits, which I think at the very least the state can do in these circumstances.
And you're going to do that?
I'm certainly going to look into it at the earliest opportunity.
I'm certainly going to look into it at the earliest opportunity. With a straight face. That's twice he's used it when they tried to nail him there on what are you actually going to do, when are you actually going to do any actual thing. I'll do it at the earliest opportunity. So you see, you have to decode what these clowns do by analysing every word and the meanings underneath those words.
I want to become more in Ireland about the horror and brutality of life in the Magdalen laundries. And yes, your department is still quoting the Magdalens committee at the UN and so on, saying that there was no evidence of physical abuse. Was it horror and brutality or was it not?
Well, I certainly don't dispute any of the findings on your show, and they very much coincide with what was said firsthand to me this afternoon by people who did experience a loss of liberty, an inability to function, a loss of education, a loss of opportunity, a separation from their parents. That to me very much equates to a regime of brutality. And that's why I believe it's important that the state does continue with this redress scheme.
Okay, I want to bring in...
And there you have it. So, internationally, and for example in a letter to the Ombudsman in relation to the Magdalen laundries in 2016, the government in its defence said that it wasn't accepting the sensational, in inverted commas, media accounts of what went on in these laundries, and that they weren't supported by facts. So on one hand, they accept the reality, which we all know, but when it comes to legal matters, or when it comes to going to the United Nations or the European Union rights bodies and defending the actions of the government, they say, what liabilities? What harm? There's no findings of criminal acts. There's no findings of direct abuse. And this is something which they will use in relation to the mother and baby homes. So if that gives you an idea of the fact that the women in the Magdalen laundries still haven't got their records from the religious orders and are still seeking that, and the government is doing nothing about the fact that they haven't. If you want to look at that and examine it, I think you will find indications in how they've treated the Magdalens of how they will treat people in the upcoming mother and baby home investigations. So be warned, be forewarned as to what the game is. I'm going to go into this in a bit more detail, and I'll be back shortly with that, laying out what their actual game plan has been, and also the tactics and techniques we've used to decode what will happen next February in advance so that we can prepare for that. And I'll be back with that analysis. But in the meantime, a good day for Magdalens to come together in solidarity with each other. But also, unfortunately, a good day for the propaganda machinery of concern and fake compassion, which is wrapped around these events, and which you have to dig into the propaganda to realise that in fact very little has changed. Oliver J. Flanagan was a noted conservative Fine Gael Minister of Government, and his son Charles Flanagan, as Minister of Justice, is no different. It was Paddy Cooney, who was a Fine Gael minister, who told the first annual general meeting of adoption workers that they should go out there and take babies off of mothers, that everybody had determined it was in the best interests of all concerned that they should do that. So Fine Gael and the party this man represents have been the architects and enablers of this system down the years. So it's no surprise that what you're getting is propaganda and much less else. Okay, I'll be back with more on that. Thanks very much, and keep tuned to the latest developments on irishfirstmothers.com or in the Voice of Irish First Mothers page on Facebook. This has been Fintan Dunne reporting.